All right. What's up, neighbors? Thanks for tuning in today. We have a cool episode planned for several reasons. Today we have Jack Marchette, who's going to be on the show talking about Boxwood Distillery. He's going to tell us the story from start to finish of how this place came about. But it's also a neat one because we're actually filming on location today. So if you're listening to this on Spotify or on Apple Podcasts, we do encourage you to please go check YouTube. Because we're going to have the video. So we're going to be talking about several of the different spirits that Jack makes here. You'll get a cool kind of a behind the scenes here at Boxwood Distillery if you do go watch the video. So while we do we appreciate you listening, but we also would encourage you to go watch this one. It's also going to be nice because you don't have to listen to the three of us who are normally on here because we're not going to do a whole lot of talking today because I have heard a good bit of the story that Jack is going to tell about Boxwood, and it's fascinating. It's truly a great history that Jack has out here, and he's doing a wonderful thing here in the Pee Dee area. And Jack, I'm gonna just kind of turn it over to you and let you just really tell us where this thing started and where's it going.
Well, appreciate it. Glad to have you all out this morning. We are excited about this being our first podcast. We actually became licensed back in November to be able to operate as a micro distillery, and so it's exciting for us to be able to start selling product and meeting the public, and to have me on this today is an honor. So thank y'all for being here. And Trey and I go way back, and so from that standpoint, this is my pleasure. So
a couple of inches of mustache ago.
Yeah, a couple of mustaches, maybe a couple of haircuts that stopped during COVID, but he and Rob. I've known Rob longer than I've known Trey, so that's another story. But talking about Boxwood Distillery, Boxwood Distillery came from an idea and from actually just playing around, starting back in 2018. Me and Chris Canfield had the same desire, which is, well, it'd be interesting to see if we could not make some kind of spirit. And, you're allowed a gallon of product that you can make and still be legal, even though you got to be careful and all this. So when I say this, check out the laws of South Carolina before you do anything. But what I'll say is we experimented with a small still on my back porch. And so part of the history starts with, our back porch. Well, our back porch is on a house that's built in 1870, and it's been in my family since before that. On my mother's side, the family came into this property around the turn of the century of 1800. And the house, like I said, was built in 1870. And the name Boxwood comes from the name of the farm. And so a lot of people know the farm as Triple R Farms, which is actually named after my three daughters, Rose, Rebecca, and Rachel, whenever we were in the nursery business. And Triple R Farm still is in business, and it's actually now run by Jimmy Morales, who is a gentleman that worked for us for years and does a great job. So come out to see Jimmy if you can, too. So I'll give him a plug while we're talking about it. But,
It looks beautiful out there right now.
It really does.
Yeah. We're coming into spring.
I can actually remember it as kids coming out here and picking strawberries and stuff. That was, in fact, anybody that I tell where Boxwood is, that's how I say, whenever you were a kid, where you went to pick strawberries.
It's amazing how many people will come up to me and said, I remember going on a hayride and touring and seeing all the farm animals. My favorite thing back then was telling them, where do you get something from? And of course, they say from the grocery store. And you go, no, you get cows, you get beef from the store and stuff like that. And so part of the story is actually ties in with that. We took the farm as a family into a land grant, conservation easement in 2011. And we actually did that through the Pee Dee Land Trust. And so we got 335 acres of land that will never be converted into any kind of industry, subdivided into a subdivision. There can only be a total of 6 houses, and they have to be family members on it. And so it also can't have anything but agriculture on it. And so part of that presented a different challenge for us is, okay, what kind of business can I actually start that is agriculture related, that it'll be fun, as well as something that will help pay for taxes and insurance and the expenses of the farm down the road. We lease the farm to the Galloways, and they actually do the agricultural growing. They grow my corn for me for our production. And so, the realization that narrows down. So I could either grow trees, or I can grow crops, I could grow grass, those kind of things. And then those don't sound like fun. Those sound like work.
Right.
And
That's not the name of the game.
no, that's not. So we approached the Pee Dee Land Trust and said, you know what? You make whiskey from corn. You make whiskey from wheat. You make it from barley. And, same with beer, same with wine is made from grapes. We could grow grapes if we wanted to. And the realization, that's a lot of work too. So the realization that came up with the idea, presented to them, and actually the USDA actually identifies beer, wine, and spirits as an agriculture export product. And so it falls within the conservation easement, and they reviewed it and studied it and said yes. So I want to also clarify, we're not a bar. We are a micro distillery. We're allowed to sell 3 bottles to an individual a day. We're allowed to sell 4.5 ounces of tastings, or either 4.5 ounces including a cocktail in a given day to an individual who is of age. And so that's kind of the legal side of it. But the history side of it is, we started experimenting. We made some rum. We made some Applejack, and all this kind of stuff. And besides being fun, it was actually pretty good. And then we ventured into trying to make a bourbon. And that's a whole different challenge to do. And so we did that, and showed the guys here earlier a small barrel, it was less than a gallon. And that's how much we would make. And we'd age it in that barrel. And, to be honest, kind of surprised ourselves. It actually tasted pretty good. And so we continued to work on that now. And back in those days, you could buy a kit off of Amazon, and that all the grain would come in already mixed and all this kind of stuff. So you really don't know what it is. Mm-hmm. And so then we started researching. And, my background is agriculture. I've got my wife and I have a degree in horticulture. And long story short, there's a certain amount of chemistry you have to have and all these kind of things. But truthfully, when you're talking about making any kind of spirit, you're talking about recipes. And so, what I, started doing is tasting different bourbons and trying to decide what I liked, and then also my best friend, Tom Wilson, who is the master distiller with us, as well as the master taster of our group, and really is my best friend. So we hang out a lot together, go to church together and stuff. He comes out and helps me whenever we're doing any kind of cooking and distilling, and is right here with me. And I wish he was here now with us, because he's a good character. He's retired, but he comes out here and has a job per his wife. But long story short, he's the one who said, we got something here. I taste bourbons and things like that, but he knows bourbons. And so relying on his taste, we pretty much went for a wheated bourbon. So our products, when we're talking about the bourbons and whiskeys, is basically to be a bourbon. If you need to understand the laws, the way that work, or the rules according to the TTB federal government, to be a bourbon, it has to be at least 51% corn and then 49% of other grains. Or in our case, we do a 70% corn and 15% malted barley and 15% malted wheat. And I'm going to reach over here and show basically this isn't available yet, but this will be available in 2 years. Now, that's kind of investment.
I was going to ask, what's the age requirements to be able to go?
So this actually, if you look at it, it says Boxwood Bourbon, straight bourbon whiskey. And so the distinction between this, when you're looking on the shelves and need to understand, there's all kinds of bourbons, but a straight bourbon whiskey has to be aged a minimum of 2 years in a brand new charred oak barrel. And so it can't be, a recycled one you did before, all that kind of stuff. And so this one, it'll be 2 years from now before we ever get to taste it. Now, what I got in here is not 2-year-old bourbon. This is basically Insurrection, and I'll explain about it in a minute. But so going back to our flavor profile, I brought along a little show and tell since we have two teachers here with us. So, we got yellow corn here. This is yellow dent corn, and actually grown by the Galloways right here on Boxwood Farm. And, the interesting thing about it is it's just pretty much a straight field corn. It's, pretty much what you see everywhere you look when you're driving around in Florence and Darlington County. All right, so 70% of that is in the mash. And then this is malted barley. Now, why do you need malted barley? And this is part of the process. So whenever you're starting a mash, you basically, and I'll use my mash recipe, and for my mash tune that's behind me, it's a 200-gallon mash tune still. And so we'll actually put 225 pounds of ground corn. So think of grits. We'll grind up a corn. We grind it ourselves, and we take it fresh. I mean, it's ground that moment and immediately goes into the still and with hot water. And
locally ground.
Locally ground. I'm grinding it with here on the property. We actually were looking for people to grind it and all this kind of stuff. And when I couldn't find an adequate source, I invested in a hammer mill. And so when I probably should show up some hammer milled corns because it's kind of neat, but just picture grits.
Right.
So you can imagine I've got probably 100 gallons to 150 gallons of water that's at 185 degrees that I'm pouring the grits into, not grits, but the grains into. And we're stirring that up, and we'll hold that temperature for a couple hours. Then I'll turn the heat off. And then I have to wait for the temperature to drop to about 150 degrees before I come back in with the malted barley. And then also, at the same time, the malted wheat. Now this is not grown locally because I'm also trying to get the malted. You can't find that locally. So the malted barley comes from Ireland, and so it's actually a malted barley that is used in distilling and known for good flavors and things. And then the malted wheat comes from Germany. And so those are added at 150 degrees. At the same time, I need to back up and say when I did the corn, because it gets so thick like grits, you think about trying to stir 250 pounds of grits, you're going to build up some arm muscles. Yeah. Now, we do have an agitator in there going. We actually add a product called amylase A, and that's actually an enzyme that actually makes it go into more of a soup solution, hold it out. It doesn't make it, it prevents it from gelatizing. And so when you add the malted barley and malted wheat, and I guess I probably should explain what malting is. So when you take grain like barley or wheat and you want to malt it, you lay it out and you'll take a warehouse like our warehouse out there, and it's like a big pan, and you'll float the grain on water and it'll sprout. Then you take away the water and immediately dry it. And so what you got is a grain that is sprouted. Well, what's happened is, a grain of corn or a grain of wheat actually has starch in it. And that starch, whenever you talk about a seed germinating, the enzyme is turning the starch into sugar that then the enzyme's causing it to sprout. Well, when you catch it at that stage, you're catching it at its highest stage of enzyme. And what we're actually doing is when we're adding that malt to the corn, because corn doesn't have that much enzyme in it, it actually helps turn the starch in the corn and the starch in the other two grains into sugar. And so that's the key to success of getting a recipe.
Right.
Because what you need is sugar to do what?
Make alcohol.
Make alcohol with
the
yeast.
yeast to eat.
Yep.
Yep. And so here we are.
How did somebody figure that out?
That Indian was really smart.
I'm telling you,
because what he
man.
was doing is eating oysters down at the coast, and he was drinking some kind of alcoholic beverage because he had to drink alcohol before he ever ate that first oyster.
And smoking tobacco.
Smoking tobacco. That's right. While he was doing all that, so the Indians had it. They were really the smartest ones out there. So when you go from that stage, we're at 150 degrees. We've done this. Then I got to let it cool again down to about 90 degrees. And when it gets to 90 degrees, then I can pitch yeast, because if you pitch it too high, you stall the yeast. If you pitch it too late, you stall the yeast. And so the yeast, comes in, it's dry. We'll actually prepare it by taking it and adding water to a pot of yeast, and then hydrate it. And so it'll actually get it kind of where it's moist before we pour it in on top of it. We'll pour it in, we'll stir it in, and of course there's different theories. Should you stir it in or should you leave it on the top? I stir it in because I think it gets a better displacement across the whole profile. And so then what I'll do is I'll actually keep the temperature in the 80s on the mash, inside the mash tun. That mash tun, what I've got is a relatively unique system. It's not completely unique, but basically it's a mash tun strip and still. So we will actually ferment it in the mash tun. Some processes will actually take, and they'll actually do exactly what I talked about, do all the cooking, and then they'll take the liquid off, pump it off into a fermentation tank, and then they'll pitch the yeast into it. And so you're separating the solids from it. We choose to leave it in there and ferment in the tank, or the mash tun tank, and then basically 10 days later, or until it's actually finishing doing the conversion of sugar into alcohol, we'll then distill it from that mash tun. And so it's on the grain distillation. Our thoughts on that is you're carrying that flavor profile that you're trying to get with the different grains on it. And so with that, like I said, we had the Boxwood bourbon. That same recipe is what we use for Insurrection. And so Insurrection is actually a 3-grain bourbon using the same exact grain bill, but it's not necessary that we have to wait 2 years. So it's not a straight bourbon, it's just a bourbon.
With putting the name at 3 grain, is that a requirement, like you were talking about the legalities of aging before, or is that just an advertisement of what it is?
That's basically just an advertisement. So that's a really good question, because the federal government is very, very particular about the proper naming. It's kind of like the FDA with Food and Drug Administration. The TTB requires you to go through every single label has to be approved in advance. And so the things that are most important on there is that I'm actually calling it a bourbon whiskey. That's the distinction. I've got to show the proof. I got to show the alcohol by volume. I've got to show my address and name on it, and also the aging of the product. And so this one has aged a minimum of 6 months. So, the rest of it is all I can pretty much decorate like I want. And then also on the back, you got to put all the things along the lines of what's in it. So,
Because the blank area that you have there, is that
UPC.
Oh, that's what I was.
Yeah, UPC. And we're not at the UPC level yet.
It's coming.
Right.
It's coming.
So in this case, it's blended corn, wheat, and barley whiskey, colored and flavored with wood chips and natural flavors. All right. So what is that? Why do we have all that? Well, one of the things is we do have this in brand new charred white oak barrels, but what we add is to them are called staves, which is actually white oak that is charred and it's spiraled. And so we'll have the barrel, it's aged in it, and then we're adding the additional charring and flavor profile. And so we won't just do just the char that's on the barrel. We're actually adding additional levels of char as well as fresh uncharred. And what you're getting is basically the process of osmosis, where the difference of the, and just use this way, the sugar water that's in the oak cells versus the alcohol and water that is in the barrel, you're actually trying to get an equal balance between the two. And so you maybe have an alcohol go into the oak, and then you're having the sugar come out of the barrel oak itself, and in the wood staves is trying to balance through osmosis. The interesting thing that I try to explain to people when they're here and they say, well, I don't understand char 2, char 3, char 4. And I said, well, think of it this way. When you're at a cookout and you're cooking marshmallows, you know, what kind of marshmallow do you like? Do you like the one that's just slightly charred, or do you like the one that's a little bit more, or do you like the one that's caught on fire and is burnt?
Right.
Which one's the most sweet? You ever thought of that?
I mean,
Yeah,
in my
they're all
opinion,
sweet.
I was about to say they're all good. I like the charred. I just pulled the char off.
Yeah, but the charred actually is, to me, it gives you the most sugar flavor to
Right.
it because it's crystallized
Right.
and all that kind of stuff. It's the same kind of thing when you're charring an oak barrel, and so the heavier the char, you know, the more you're going to pick up on some of the flavors. That's why they say it needs to be a brand new oak barrel one time. You know, because what happens is you've utilized the good out of that oak barrel the first time. Now, you can take that oak barrel and then say, I could sell it to either Seminar or Locomotive, and they can put beer in it, and
Right.
they're going to pick up, because what you have then is the beer working between osmosis with the charring with the bourbon in the cells, and it's working back and forth trying to get equalized.
That's where they get cask aged. Is that what that
That's
is?
cast
It's like the
aged.
bourbon barrel aged stouts and
You
things
actually
like
answered
that. The question, whenever you mentioned earlier that you had to have a brand new one, I wrote down, can you use those barrels for any other type of spirit?
I can use it for a rum if I wanted to, or basically wineries will use it, things like that. You also can take, you know, I could take a barrel, and I probably won't, but I could take a beer barrel after it's been used where I've sold it to them, then they could sell it back to me, and then I could probably do some kind of specialty spirit that is flavored that way.
Yeah.
So
That's pretty interesting. I've
Yeah,
never
so,
thought about it. I see the chain of it coming from you to them, but never
The
back to you
yeah,
from that.
well, when
that would be that would be an interesting. So I'm not the biggest fan of the barrel aged stouts
either.
and everything, but
yeah, the other thing is you can actually, you know, you can buy bourbon that's been aged, or excuse me, you can buy whiskey, or you can buy bourbon that has then been already done in a charred oak barrel, brand new, that then is taken out of it and put into a Bordeaux wine barrel, and you get that flavor profile
Right.
of a bourbon with a Bordeaux or any kind of wine. Now those are getting into a whole lot bigger different
Right.
levels than what I'm.
Do you get pretty close to like cognac at that point?
Yeah, that's you're really starting to experiment into some complexity that at this point, you know, I look at it and go, look, I'm lucky if I can keep up with what we're doing.
right. So I have might be just a silly question that I just don't know about. I know there's bourbon and then there's whiskey. So why is that one a bourbon whiskey?
Okay, so what was the first thing I said it has to be a bourbon?
It has to be 51% corn.
So if I had 50% corn and the rest was in wheat, it's now a whiskey.
Okay.
So, or, you know, it basically is that to be a bourbon, and it has to be in a new oak barrel.
Mm-hmm.
I can make a whiskey out of a used barrel if I wanted to.
Right.
So I could make the same mash thing and put it into a used barrel and age it that way, but then it hasn't met the letter of the law to be a bourbon.
Okay.
You know,
Yeah.
you think about this, you know, Jack Daniels. Jack Daniels is not a bourbon. Jack Daniels is a whiskey,
Tennessee whiskey.
right?
Right.
And so
And it's not smooth.
yeah, and that's
That song's a lie.
yeah, and that's part of what there's a huge following, that basically like Tennessee whiskey, and then there's those who like bourbon or Kentucky
Right.
bourbon, and so then you really start getting into the purist and things like that. And I will say, you know what, Tom, Jack, Chris, and Jackson. I meant to also bring up Jackson, my grandson, who's 23. Helps us also, and he's the heavy lifter, and it just helps me all the time. And
Yeah.
so I want to give him a shout out on that. But when you think about where are we going with this and all this, and I'll just say, I just want you to taste
Right.
taste what I have. I don't care what you call it. Does this taste like what you want?
Right.
And you can compare it, and the realization we've had, we've done a lot of people tasting it. Whether everybody's lying to me or not, I guess the sales will tell it.
Right.
More than anything. Once again, this isn't available yet. This is going to be down the road, probably in the fall before it's available.
So this year it'll be available.
Yeah, the Insurrection.
Insurrection.
Yes, so Insurrection will be available. The Boxwood Bourbon, which is a straight bourbon, will not be.
What's the time frame on that?
2 years. And I say, the right answer, when it's ready.
Right.
True.
And that's one of the difficulties of going into a business like this is that, it's not a quick entry, and you'll basically see most distilleries out there that don't have big money behind it are saying, gosh, I got to make something else until then. Now,
Right.
we have not chose to do the flavored moonshines at this time and things like that. It's easy. We could do it. We do have some ideas, and we can talk about that if we got more time later, some things that we're looking at, but it's really the profile that we're really looking for is the rums and the bourbons is our thoughts, and one other product. So, and I'm going to come back and tell the history. I guess I'm kind of jumping
Yeah, that's
around
all
this
right.
'cause
That's how these normally go.
so we got one product that's called a Blind Tiger, and
Beautiful label.
yeah,
It is.
It's basically a spirit distilled from cane and grain, is what it says on it.
I love the triple R plug there at the end
Yeah.
of it.
So it's also if
Yeah.
you look at how we spell Blind Tiger, it's got 3 R's on the end. So a lot of y'all out there listening may remember, Triple R Farms, which is basically still here, is named after my 3 daughters, Rose, Rebecca, and Rachel. A lot of people don't realize that when they're driving by and seeing the sign. And so part of this business, when I was talking earlier about how we have started and built this, is with the long term is something for the 3 daughters and their husbands and families to be able to continue to grow and benefit from it. And so, I'm 68, close to retirement, but I'm not going to retire from this, is trying to start a fun business that can be profitable, that can be on the farm,
Right.
and allow them to enjoy it in future generations is really the motivation behind it. And then the second part of this, I got to give a shout out to my wife. I forgot, that's my best partner of all.
The boss.
The boss.
The boss. The boss is running the show up front right now. She doesn't like being in front of the camera, and whenever y'all said we had 2 hours, I said, gosh, that's not going to be enough time for anybody who knows me. But the realization that Triple R is really significant and very important to me. But the Blind Tiger it'll be part of the story later on. But what's the part right now is when we're talking about manufacturing the Insurrection and the bourbon, Boxwood Bourbon, straight bourbon, is actually whenever we're done with the distilling out of those products. So we had, 225 pounds of corn and 50 pounds each of the other two. We've still got, all we've done is distilled the alcohol out of it. So now all of a sudden the water level is lower in the still, but it's not gone, and it still has alcohol in that. And so instead of wasting that, I experimented with this. Didn't know what you call this kind of product. I was thinking it was called a sour mash. Well, I learned later on that's not really what how a sour mash is made. So what Blind Tiger is we will take over the leftover product still in the mash tune, and we'll add 300 pounds of brown sugar, dark brown sugar. And so it's almost like a rum at that point. It's not a moonshine, because it's basically what we've done is we've reintroduced sugar that's already converted. We're not having to convert the starches anymore, in with the grain taste profile of a liquid, and we'll we'll ferment it, and 10 days later, we'll run the mash tune again, and that will generate a product that once y'all, if you were to taste this, would find that it's tastes like a whiskey.
You got me already intrigued by the label in honor of the 1894 Darlington Rebellion.
Yep.
Yeah. So I haven't said that, but actually on all of them, just about every product we got, that's on the whiskeys. And so
okay.
yeah, we will go. So it's on the Insurrection.
Oh yeah, okay.
And so
a good story to come with that.
That's
somebody who enjoys history.
This is part of the history. So getting back to finishing up on the Blind Tiger, so it is, on the back, it's a blended corn, wheat, and barley whiskey colored with flavor, wood chips, and natural flavors. It says the same thing as over here, but what it has is not artificial sugar, it's actually real sugar added to it. The profile on this is very smooth, and what's interesting is it's someone who's doesn't like the profile of the Insurrection will like the Blind Tiger. Mm-hmm. And what I will say is if I were to be sipping all day long, I'd sip on Blind Tiger. If I want to try to impress somebody and say, "Ooh, I got this new stuff," I give them an Insurrection. Eventually, I'll give them the Boxwood straight bourbon. But I think Trey may be able to give some insight into tasting some of those before.
We've had a lot of great feedback because Jack did bring us a bottle of this into the shop, and everybody absolutely loved them.
Yeah,
absolutely loved them. We didn't get any negative feedback at all. Everybody wanted to know how they could get their hands on it, how they could get more to be able to take home. And we just told them it was a waiting process.
I remember it disappeared from the shop pretty quiely.
Yes, yes, it did. It was like
legit. Their one haircut.
All of them were some of the first bottles to disappear from the bar at the shop.
Yeah,
and to hear Jack talk about it from when we were behind Naturally Outdoors to talk about the dream of it, and to be sitting in here now doing this is absolutely amazing.
Yeah. I mean, it's. Actually, Trey and Rob were part of all that discussion and saying, when are you going to have it? When are you going to have it? And I need to add that part of the history is so, as we kind of experimented and all this kind of stuff, in the beginning, Trey knew me then. I was actually with Wells Fargo, and so I was, buzzed haircut, suit and tie, and all this kind of
cool
stuff.
Cars.
Yeah, had a nice car. And, my wife... was the one who was saying, if you're going to do this, you're going to need to do it legally. And the process to go legal is a Mount Everest to get there. And so, we talked about it, and eventually I actually left Wells Fargo and went to work for Barrier Reef Fiberglass Pools. So my real-time job is I'm the chief financial officer for Barrier Reef Pools. And so then I started working on this from a legal standpoint. So we're really looking at the process now from when we actually dived in would be right about a year and a half to get through that process. Mm-hmm. And you're not just done once you've done that. So every month you're reporting everything along that line because they want to know how much you've made, how much you've put in storage, how much you've bottled, and how much you sold every month. And so there's
Who do you report that to?
the TTB
TTB.
and the state,
Okay.
South Carolina Department of Revenue, because it is taxed. There is
Right.
there is excise tax. It is, you don't see on the, when you get a receipt, well, you see a sales tax. Well, in every bottle there is an excise tax that goes to the federal government.
Right.
But keep moving on down. So we're still in the bourbons. So we're going to talk about, and this will be part of the history when we go in. So this is Tillman's Folly. And I guess, again, it says in honor of the 1894 Darlington Rebellion. So I'm just holding these two, teachers out here, holding them back.
Yeah, I just want to really quick. Just tell me what it is. Yeah, any past students out there, just remember Ben Tillman, guys. Remember I talked about
Right,
him? I'm just saying.
This label doesn't look like it. You can't even put the word bar into it. It needs to be in a saloon.
Yeah. Right, for
Like,
sure.
It
So is this Ben Tillman that you have?
that's his picture, pulled right off the internet.
Is this before his eye was messed up?
Well, I don't know about that. So Pitchfork Ben, as y'all well know, was the governor back in the 1890s. And so I'm going to still hold y'all out a little bit longer because we're going to talk product for a minute.
Right.
So what's interesting about this product,
Jack, I'm gonna just slide this over so the camera can
yeah,
get that.
I'm sorry, I'm going
Yeah,
to hold it
I'm
up
gonna put it
too.
over here too.
So Tillman's Folly. So what's interesting, what it says on here, a Jimmy Red Corn whiskey. So what I've got here is a bottle of Jimmy Red Corn that hadn't been ground.
This has just come back to the South Carolina region, correct?
That's correct. It's an heirloom corn that just about became extinct and was lost, except for somebody had probably about this much corn down in the low country. And he actually then started producing the corn and saving it and building the stock and was able to to where it's.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
And so it's also, the difference in it and the yellow corn. Yellow corn, is genetically, I won't say it's genetically modified, but it's been genetically developed for different reasons. This is just a corn that probably came from the Indians. Or
This is maize.
Or
Maize.
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 This is maize, and maize from a protein standpoint and nutritional and flavor is so much different than yellow corn. So we've actually developed the Jimmy Red. The Ben Tillman is made with this, and so the difference in it, the mash tune is actually mash recipe is 80% of Jimmy Red corn and 10 of the other, because we really want that corn flavor that's coming from it.
Is there a way to measure the sugar content between the red corn and the field corn?
There actually is. I haven't done it. It'd be the starch content that can be converted into sugar. Basically, you're talking about specific gravity measurements and things like that. We do have hydrometers that we use. I do have what I want to call it a spectrometer that you look through that tells you what your sugar content is. I'm still haven't perfected that because I think I got bifocals and I'm sitting there going, I'm having problems reading this thing. But so this is going to be months out. That's
Months. So we're months out.
What's
from
the
now.
age requirement on that?
It's 6 months.
6 months.
So but the thing about this is we grew it this year, but then I've got to get it into production because this is not a lead item for it. This is kind of a specialty product. So it's going to take a little more time because I got to work it into that 3 days that I can work on it every
Right.
So you guys are part of bringing back
Yes.
the corn.
Yeah.
That's amazing.
That is.
Well, what's interesting is, so the yellow corn, I can't save the corn seed from this year's crop and plant it and have it be the same because it's genetically designed to be reused, not reused, but to be just sold. So you have to buy brand new yellow corn. The Galloways provide all that. This I actually regenerate from my own corn, and then that just leads into the next product.
That's something to point out to our listeners how special that is. So
is.
you're saying that you're taking that red corn and reusing it, planting it season after season, And not only that, this we're talking about a product that was essentially gone that you couldn't get your hands on, and now you have it right here on the farm using it in your alcohol.
Yes, and I can buy it off the market, but it's a whole lot more expensive than buying regular corn.
But it's even better that you're
the meaning that it has
Yeah.
now that this is done on your family's property that's been in your family since the 1800s, that you're already growing the field corn for. Now you're part of a select group of people that are bringing back a native corn to South Carolina that was
That's what I was
essentially
getting ready to
gone.
say. As somebody who has taught South Carolina history for 8 years now, I'm big into it. We're talking about that red corn is something that was probably being grown before Europeans even got here.
Yes.
Yeah, we're talking.
I don't know specifically that, but my guess is yes.
Yeah, because we know, obviously, when the Europeans got here, that maize, corn, is one of these staple crops for Native Americans. So there's a good chance that the Europeans got here is like, oh, this is good stuff.
And the interesting part about it is the original spirit makers in South Carolina, that was a preferred corn until you get to the next one. And this one's called Deadlock. And so Deadlock, interesting, in honor of the 1894 Darlington Rebellion. So a little bit of drop of more to come.
Foreshadowing.
So
The one that's above it, what does it say? A bloody butcher?
is made with a bloody butcher corn, which this is not Jimmy Red. This is bloody butcher corn, which is an heirloom corn very similar to the Jimmy Red, but it's got a slightly different flavor profile. But the other part is I just love the name, which ties into the history part that you'll hear in a little bit. So what we got is, like I said, is Deadlock. And I guess instead of going into the rums next, which is what we do have available, I'll go ahead and break into it because I think I got you guys right on the edge of the cliff. Yeah. I want to know, what in the world is this?
The history that is attached to it. Just
I'm actually going to stall ourselves for just a second because I want to ask. I noticed on the Tillman's Folly, so this one has corn whiskey listed on it. That one doesn't say whiskey on it or bourbon. So what does it? It falls under a whiskey though, or did I just not see it?
It says a Jimmy Red corn whiskey.
Okay.
But it actually is a bourbon because it's done 80% corn and 10 and 10, and it will go into new barrels, new oak barrels.
Right.
So it will be a bourbon, or it is a bourbon. So where to start? So we're going to talk about turn of the century, 1893, and we're going back to Governor Ben Tillman. So what was going on after the Civil War in South Carolina, and not just South Carolina, but the South in general, is there was actually a fair amount of alcoholism. Not a fair amount. There's books written.
Yeah, right. There's a lot.
And one want to kind of point out, one of the things that we give out with every sale is this sticker, and it says, "Have a heart, drink responsibly." And this was actually, if you were in the front of our retail area, there is what looks like the Tin Man from The Wizard of Oz, which is actually was given to my son-in-law, Ian Hudson, who is married to my youngest daughter, by his grandfather, who actually was a recovered alcoholic. And he was in the heating and air conditioning business. And he passed away a year and a half ago or so, and was up in North Carolina. And Ian is a major in the Air Force, and so he came home for the funeral with my daughter, and they went to the funeral. And his grandfather left him the Tin Man, who was made from basically HVAC ductwork. And so if you look at him out there, he's got this big old heart sticker stuck on him that says, "Have a heart, drink responsibly." Somewhat when we got it, Ian's going, "I can't take this back and travel all over the United States with all the moves he's making. Can you keep it here?" And we said, "Yeah, we'll put it in the distillery." And my wife Beth came up with this "Have a heart, drink responsibly." It's just like we were talking earlier. Trey, doesn't drink at all, and we respect that very much so. And even I will just say, we do not want anybody to suffer with alcoholism. And if I have somebody that knows come in, I'm just if they're if they've been drinking and things like that, we'll choose not to sell them. And so, as I said earlier, we're not a bar. We do sell this, and we want people to be responsible with spirits that have alcohol in them. But we call the Tin Man Governor Tillman. So that's his nickname. And so part of the story goes back to Governor Pitchfork Ben in 1893. He and the state legislature passed a law that said all spirit makers need to bring their alcohol to a South Carolina dispensary bottling site, and they basically sell their alcohol to the dispensary, and the dispensary then bottles the alcohol in bottles that look just like this.
Oh man, those are rad.
Yeah, and so when you look at this, it basically has a palm tree, and it says South Carolina Dispensary. And they had different labels and different sizes and things like that. And this is one of many that are in my collection up in the cabinet up there, and I'll get into why I have those in a minute. But so this law is passed, and the purpose, according to the state legislature and Ben Tillman, was to help control alcoholism, but it also introduced a taxation. And, what I'll say is, when you think about taxes and things like that, when did they start? How did they start? How did they control it and things like that? This was an easy entry that says, okay, I want to make money off of something that everybody wants. And that's basically what I think was looked at, as people were going to have to pay it. Well, all of a sudden you take something that was already freely out there that wasn't taxed, and now you're taxing it, and you're requiring it to be bottled. If I was a businessman and then was told that, I would struggle with that. And so what was done is the South Carolina dispensary system was throughout South Carolina in in geographically located cities that allowed this to occur. So if you had one in Florence, you had one in Darlington. The building in Darlington is still in existence. It's not a bottling company anymore. No, neither is the one in Florence. I don't even know where it was. And then you actually have, Columbia, Charleston, Greenville, back in those days. The interesting thing about the one in Columbia, it's now a Publix building, and it's down there by the riverfront. So if you ever right near the state prison, the old state prison, there's a beautiful red brick building. It's right across, I believe, from Adelou Flour and stuff. That was the South Carolina main dispensary bottling company. Now, so each municipality was responsible for running and collecting the funds from it. And so you had the funds that were taxed got shared with that local municipality. And so the mayors of the towns were responsible for it. So at that time, the mayor in Darlington was a Dargan. His house is still in existence. A friend of mine lives in that house. Wow. And what happened was in 1893, the law was passed, word went out, and then Governor Tillman sent a letter, and I've got a copy of the letter, to the Mayor Dargan saying, where's our money? How come we're not getting our funds, that you're supposed to be sending to us? And Mayor Dargan sent back, well, they won't use it. They won't do it. And, of course, then another letter went back from Governor Tillman saying, you've got to make them do it. Another letter went back, I can't get them to do it. He said, well, I'll send state constables, which at that time, state constables had rights to where they could go and search and seize any kind of alcohol in somebody's house. And so they had the ability to go into your house, and if you had this bottle and not that bottle, then you could be fined and this taken away. Excuse me. So Governor Tillman says, this isn't right. I'm going to send state constables. He sent a train from Columbia to Darlington and Florence to have meetings with the spirit makers. Well, at that time, my great-great uncle Robert Morton Muldrow, Uncle Bubba, was, was a young man running this farm. He lived in the house that I live in. He never married. He was known for having entertaining with fish stews and was considered a great entertainer. And so from that standpoint, that, as well as at that time, a lot of y'all are familiar with Muldrow's Mill in Florence, which is over on the south side of Florence. Those were cousins to basically Bubba, and because he was Robert Morton Muldrow. He had a sawmill and grist mill on Jeffries Creek, which is on the other side of our property. Mm-hmm. And so with a sawmill, grist mill, you have making grits and grinding corn and all that kind of stuff. And how did we get in the whiskey business in the whole United States is the grain producers and farmers and all this kind of stuff had leftover grain, and they said, what am I going to do with this? Can't feed it to the cows, or I can, but don't have enough. Long story short, let's make whiskey out of it. Well, Bubba was also in the whiskey making business because, how do I know this? I've got ledgers that show where he's selling hoghead cheese and tobacco and all these different things and whiskey. And then on top of it, our house was full of these bottles. Mm-hmm. There was one closet. It was really what we considered a wood closet in the center of the house. And the house has a fireplace in every room, but this one has a firebox off to the side. And so growing up, as kids, we weren't allowed to go in that closet. And I'm not talking about a tall closet. I need to actually make a picture so people can see it. And when we moved back, when Beth and I had gotten married and we were gone for years and then came back to Florence and eventually swapped houses with my parents, Beth said, well, I'm going to turn that closet into a toy closet for the kids because it's a short door into it like that. And started clearing it out. And we have what are called demijohn bottles, which are the big glass bottles that are covered with wicker and things like that. I mean, probably a dozen of those.
Good for fermenting.
They were also good for, you'd fill that up and you'd have to take it to the dispensary, and that's where you'd pour it out. You didn't have barrels and things like that. You had, and you wanted to keep your spirits, clean. And so got those, some jugs, and then a slew of dispensary bottles. In high school, y'all see my bottle collection, it's really started on the far end of the collection is primarily what came out of that closet. The rest of it I collected digging and stuff all over Darlington County and dumps and things like that. Back then it was just like we were talking about arrowhead collecting and things like that. I loved bottle collecting. And this isn't all of them. This is just some of them. And by the way, the pictures, the shelves with the bottles, the windows on it are actually the original windows out of our house when we remodeled. So that is all blown glass window panes, except for ones that were busted from hail back in the 80s. And so couldn't throw those away. So that's why they're not painted and they look rough and all that, because they're original. Right. So the house was, like I said, built in 1870. Those are pretty good windows that lasted, that long. So where are we going with the South Carolina dispensary? So what happens, governor says, Dargan, I'm sending you state constables to meet with your spirit makers. So they come in, and I don't I haven't ever seen the minutes or anything from the meeting, but I assume the meeting went along the lines of, guys, this is the law, and you're going to need to do this. And, if you don't, we're going to come shut you down. We're going to do all these kind of things. And so it probably was a firm meeting. And when the meeting was over, the constables went back to board the train on the train depot, or waiting for the train to come. And interesting thing happened. There were two young men that had nothing to do with spirit making and things like that were at the platform at the train, and they got into a fight. I speculate it was probably over a girl. or something along that line. But it started out as a fist fight. And one of the constables grabbed one of the men. And when he grabbed the man, the other man cold cocked him. From that, guns were pulled, shots were fired, and actually 4 people were killed, 2 constables, 2 civilians, and several were wounded. Well, as with any kind of confusion, I believe the townspeople and spirit makers thought the constables caused this, and they ran them out of town. And so they ran them out of town on foot down what was now Highway 340, which would have been a dirt road back then. Mm-hmm. And 340 goes through our property and through the head of the pond or swamp on Timmonsville Highway, basically. Mm-hmm. And that was the headwaters of our pond. And they chased the constables into the swamp, and they wouldn't let them out. But the townspeople were smart enough not to go in.
Right.
So they left them. Well, in the meantime, Mayor Dargan sends a telegram to the governor and says, we have a problem. We have a revolt. We have a revolution. We have, and I'll just use the word insurrection. Now, I came up with the word insurrection long before we came up with Donald Trump. Now, if you're a Trump fan and you want a bottle of insurrection for that reason, more power to
Buy
you.
it. Yeah, buy it. Spend your money.
Yeah, but long story short, so the insurrection has occurred. But what happened while the townspeople that chased the constables were gone, one, they tended to the wounded. But then the mayor kind of overreacted, saying there was something is terrible going on. Which he wasn't overacting with 4 people killed. That's bad. And so he basically got the governor hyped up. Well, the governor then said, well, we're going to send state militia to put this revolt down. And he sent out word to all the officers at all these militia locations across the state saying, we need men. And what he got in return was, that's not what we're here for. We're here to defend the state. We just finished the Civil War, right, fighting amongst ourselves. We don't want to return to that. And so he got a bunch of no's, which was truthfully insurrection again.
Right.
And which led to some investigations, which is really some interesting reading. So I tell you guys as history buffs, it's really an interesting story, and you probably can find stuff that I'd be interested in learning that I may not know.
Right.
And so eventually he got 300 militia to volunteer. It was already overnight. Well, in the meantime, because the mayor had said, guess what? The governor's going to send the militia. A lot of the local men got upset and worried, so they rushed. Now we're talking about real problems. Rushed the armory in Darlington and took out all the guns. Now we've broke the law. Mm-hmm. I mean, the shootings, yes, that was unlawful, but after that, now we got a real problem. And so then we've got men who have seized guns that weren't theirs, and they're part of the state militia that you're going to have the other militia come in on. So the militia shows up. It's been long enough to where now all the townspeople have calmed down. They've actually are back home thinking it's over, and a trainload of state militia show up in Florence and Darlington. Well, guess what? There's nothing to put down, but they came. They didn't have their bedrolls, so they didn't have something to sleep on. They didn't bring any food. So what happens? The people of Darlington put them up in their houses, fed them, kept them for 3 days. Then they sent them home. They went home.
Mm-hmm. So vacation.
Yeah, so it's over. So how's that come down with Tillman's Folly? You tell me. The other thing is that the South Carolina dispensary system eventually failed and closed.
Right.
So he introduced taxation. He introduced strife, didn't control alcoholism. Even though I'm a Clemson graduate and I love Tillman Hall, Pitchfork Bend past was not something to be bragging about.
Right.
But so that's why it's Tillman's Folly. Then we have Deadlock, and it really is in honor of the 4 people that were killed. Is that, you know, the realization is that what a waste it was, and why I call it Deadlock is here you are in battle and nobody wins.
Right.
And losses a lot. So there's the history behind it. And Bubba was probably right in the middle of it.
Right.
I can't swear to that. I do know that Bubba was a member of the Red Shirts. From that standpoint, I know, you know, based on what stories were passed down and stuff along that line. But when you're here at the distillery, you can see pictures of him. You know, the other part that goes into that is now we can talk about rums for a second. So when you talk about the rums, we've got several. Sorry. Hand you that. Don't drop that.
Yeah, those things are very valuable.
Yeah. So
This would be a really cool tattoo.
So when you look at this, it says Blackwater White Rum, and you're not going to be able to see it on the camera, but
right here.
yeah, I can take it down back. So y'all might want to pass this around and look at it. So there's a little man in the middle with a black hat. That's Bubba. So that's my great great uncle, and that is on Jeffries Creek on the spillway at the pond. And so, you know, I had these pictures and said, you know what, we got a history here, we got a story to tell. And what I'll say is with, you know, with all marketing and things like that, if you got a story and a good product, you know, that's the purpose of you know, trying to use this. So when you're talking about rum, you know, Blackwater, so being from the Pee Dee area, you know, other than the Great Pee Dee, which is just red,
Right.
I loved growing up swimming in tannic acid, dark water, Black Creek,
Black Creek.
Jeffries Creek. I mean, it's just
Florida boy don't know about that.
No, I'm from spring country.
Yeah, this is, you know, I don't like the taste of water at Lake Murray, you know, when you're swimming in it, but give me Black Creek all day long. I'm
Right.
sorry. It's just, so that's me. And, you know, growing up, we used to swim at the pond, fish at the pond, duck hunt at the pond, you name it, we would do it. But when you're talking about rum, whole different process. We start out with the ingredients, and we use a fermenter. We go straight into the fermenting vessel, which is nothing more than a large stainless steel vat. I've got a hot water, a Rinnai hot water heater commercial that allows me to get up to 185 degrees. And so instead of having a boiler and things like that, we start with it. And so I'll start filling up the vat, and I'm adding dark brown sugar. And I'll do 300 pounds of dark brown sugar in 160 gallons of water. Then you got blackstrap molasses. As you see how this, I mean, it is really thick, but boy, it's got the flavor in it. And you know, why is the reason we use brown sugar versus white sugar? And for those that don't know, the difference is basically white sugar has been finely processed, that's the right word, processed to get the molasses off of the sugar. So it's washed and then re-dried until you get all the molasses off the sugar, because molasses is made from sugar cane, and regular sugar, unless it's corn sugar, is made from sugar cane that's been processed. And so I use the dark brown to get as much of that flavor profile as I possibly can, as well as adding the molasses. And so we'll end up with 160 gallons of syrup is what you're really talking about. And actually, we got some over there later on. You need to stick your finger. I'll take a spoon and not stick your finger in it.
Yeah, we
And-
wouldn't do that.
Yeah, and so it is really, as a matter of fact, whenever you check it using the hydrometer,
It's American Vegemite.
yeah,
Yeah,
it doesn't even register.
Right.
It's so high in sugar.
right.
And so, we'll start at that 185 degrees, and all we're trying to do is just dissolve it
Right.
and stir it, and then when it's finally dissolved, we just we cover it and let it cool.
Right.
And I'll let it cool down to about 85 degrees before I'll pitch yeast into it. And I use a different yeast for rum.
Right.
And so it'll actually ferment in that vessel for another 10 days. Or, as Trey asked earlier, how do you know when it's done?
Right.
And so what we've done is we've converted all the sugar into alcohol that it possibly can. And all alcohol, whether it's a whiskey or any of them, is clear whenever you make it. And so in this case, Blackwater white rum is what comes out of the still. And we put this in the pot still, and it goes actually through 5 distillations. So one is the distillation including the Scotch bonnet, and then I've got a column that's 4. So that's 5 distillations. Right. So when you're distilling it, you're actually, stripping out some of the flavor. If it basically increases the proof that you come off. So we'll actually start out what comes out with like 170 proof alcohol. I mean, it is right. It'll make your nose.
It's potent.
It's potent.
That's a no-no, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
But in the beginning, you get certain flavors. So we hadn't talked about this. So you with any of these, you start out as you're distilling, you'll get 4 shots, and you'll take the 4 shots, and that is actually tossed. Or in our case, we'll actually collect it, and we use it for cleaning because it is high alcohol. It's not ethanol. It's methanol. It's also acetone and all these different alcohols. So one of the things we didn't talk about is when you're actually starting your process and you're heating and distilling, all right, the first question I asked, so when does water turn to steam at what what temperature?
I have no idea.
Yeah, I couldn't tell you.
Oh my goodness, history teacher.
History teacher, not science.
Not chemistry. So Trey, when does water turn to steam? What temperature?
At 100 degrees, right?
No, that'd be 100 degrees Celsius, but 212 degrees Fahrenheit. And I sorry, I didn't mean. I thought this was an easy toss one, guy.
It was not. I was never.
Sorry. So
I was never going to get that one.
yeah. So what you don't want to do is you don't want to reach 212 because what you're doing then is you're getting alcohol all coming off and
Right.
water at the same time. So we'll heat up slowly, and it takes hours to heat up the mash tun specifically.
When I was brewing, I was looking to hit at 160.
When you were what?
When I was doing a little brewing, my closet hobby, 160, 165, nothing above 165.
Yeah, and more than likely that was what your readings were, but you're really gonna you'll get the lower alcohols off at that is when you start getting your methanol, acetones, and fusel oils and different things. The fusel oils are on the back end, but basically the 170, 180. You're really starting to get into what would be called the heads. But the first part you toss away. So you get the heads, and you're getting a flavor profile right there that's pretty good. And then you get into the hearts. And the hearts is the cleanest spirit. It's what the most of the alcohol is at. And that's what you want, overall. But we actually get good flavor taste off of the heads too. So you blend that with your hearts. And your tails, which actually have flavors too, there's a certain amount of those tails that are good too. But so we're constantly dipping and tasting,
Right.
to make sure it's not getting into a bad flavor profile.
Right.
I have had this in the early days, stuff that we just threw the entire batch away because it just did not. We don't know what we did wrong.
Right.
But hopefully now we're dialed in pretty good. but you're really trying to hold the temperature in our case, we're really sitting at 200 degrees is where we're seeing by the time it gets through all the piping and everything, it's 200 degrees over on the pot still. And by the time it gets and comes through everything and it's cooling down and turning into alcohol and dripping out that's our sweet spot. And it runs for hours doing that. But so we were, same kind of thing. It doesn't matter whether it's the bourbon or whether it's the rum, we're getting that same thing.
Right.
But, with this, there's so much sugar, we're getting so much more production out of it. And this is why you see people doing things like vodka and rums or moonshine. Actually, why you see, the smaller distilleries that are doing moonshines, because it's so simple.
Right.
There's no complexity to it. Now, as I said, this is what comes out as a rum. So everything that I'm getting ready to show you all starts with this. Afterwards, we then age Muldrow's Gold, which is Muldrow's Gold Premium Golden Rum. And if you look at the color of that thing, the color of this, it's got a pretty good,
Caramel?
Yeah, it's kind of caramel and all that kind of stuff. Now, it is this product is basically black water white rum that has been aged in charred white oak.
How long do you have to age rum?
When it's ready.
When it's
yeah.
ready. I was actually going to ask, so why is the color different? But
That's why.
why? Yeah.
And it adds, what's interesting, so as we talked about earlier about Rob Stellato, who is a mixologist here in Florence, I'm not a bartender. I know how to, from my old days, throw beer and wine over the counter, but actually mixing drinks and coming up with concoctions, that's not my specialty. My grandson's pretty good at it. So Rob came out and introduced and said, hey, I do work at Locomotive and make some mocktails and stuff like that. And I'd heard some stuff about him. So he came out and we said, Beth and I were getting ready to go out of town and said, look, we're going to be opening in a week. Gave him 3 bottles of our 3 rums and said, you come up with something and we'll see whether, what it is. And so he came up with these signature cocktails. And I have to admit, all 4 of them, when I tasted them, I was like, oh my gosh, he makes our stuff really taste even better.
Right.
Because usually I'm drinking it, tasting it straight. And long story short, Rob, as we were talking and stuff like that, he told me this Muldrow's Gold, from his perspective as a mixologist, is a winner. And the sales have actually shown that.
Right.
Is that it's actually done pretty good. So it's very smooth on the throat. The taste profiles, you get a different taste in the front and then on the back end, and it's hard to think as a rum. So that one's good. This one, for mixing, he still says that's the best one, and I would have thought that this would be more like a vodka.
Right.
Like plain across the board.
Right.
You can blend it into anything.
Yeah, anything. But he says this adds a complexity that you don't find otherwise. Then you got Pee Dee Pirate. And so Pee Dee Pirate doesn't have a family history. Oh, I forgot to say this. So did y'all notice anything on the label when you were looking at it?
I was going to ask if that's
The-
Uncle
the
Bubba back
gentleman.
there.
That is Uncle Bubba.
Yeah.
So this is him, and if you look real close, sitting on the front porch of the house, you can see the shutter behind him. And the crazy thing is my wife said, she looked at it and tells everybody else, who's it look like? And you all have to tell me. I can't deny it, and I had no idea.
You really do. Yeah, you really do.
So, and he's
It's
short.
a fitting image.
That's pretty cool.
So the story on Uncle Bubba that I didn't tell you was, we talked about the dispensary system. So in 1936 he died, and he was a bachelor, and half the farm had gone to his sister, which is my great grandmother, and half the farm he had got from his parents. And he had the house. She actually was living in Florence. So my mother was actually born on Evans Street in the 200th block. So you know where what used to be the old post office, which is now part of Francis Marion, is. And then there's Patillo's Printing, which looks like finally someone's renovating it. She lived in a house that was right there. And so my grandmother and my great-grandmother lived there until 1939. Well, in 1936, Bubba died, and he left the farm and the house to my mother and my aunt, who my mother was 6 years old and my aunt was 8 years old. Wow. So, I'll do a little name dropping. So my aunt was, and she's passed away now, was Jack Beasley. So she's David Beasley's mother. And so David's my first cousin, and then his brothers are Rick and Wes. Wes has passed away, but Rick is the president and CEO of Carolina Bank. So Jack was 8, Mama was 6. My grandmother and my great-grandmother and their family all had lifelong estate, but they didn't own it. I speculated after being in the banking industry and knowing that my grandfather and my great-grandfather had businesses in downtown Florence, and they both went bust during the Depression, is that was a move to prevent the farm going into hands that the bank would get. Mm-hmm. The half that my grandmother had, I believe, was lost to the Depression. And so she had built a house on the other side of the road over there, but never moved into it. So whenever my mother and my aunt inherited the property and the house, it took 3 years, but they ended up putting indoor plumbing for the first time and electricity, because my grandmother and great-grandmother all said, we're not moving out there unless we have indoor plumbing and electricity. Well, guess what? The Pee Dee co-op started in 1939 is whenever electricity was brought to the country. Right. So we're, the farm was one of the, whatever you call the first users of the Pee Dee electric co-op system. So they came and interviewed my mama whenever they had their 75th anniversary of it years ago, and that was a hoot. You'd have to know. For those out there that knew my mother, y'all, if you think I talk and tell stories, you just needed to meet my mother. So Muldrow's Gold is once again part of the line. Then we go back to the Pee Dee Pirate. So Pee Dee Pirate, you might as well think about second stage of Muldrow's Gold is got the charred white oak. Then we add, and this is Chris Canfield's recipe, we add cinnamon, extract of vanilla, and the interesting part that people go, wow, interesting, is Cajun citrus spice. Mm-hmm. And so that adds a flavor profile that's not found in some of the other spiced rums. It's different than Captain Morgan's, but I tend to say, okay, think of Captain's Morgan. This is a spiced rum,
right?
But if you look on it, we give credit. You can see there's maps of showing the rivers and stuff in South Carolina, especially in the Pee Dee, and it shows Florence and Darlington on the map, which I had added to the map. And so, honoring the history of, once again, from the Pee Dee. So our water is believe it or not, we're not using well water. We are using well water, but it's through Darlington County water system, and it has one of the best rated water systems in the United States. And
shout out Darlington water there, Darlington. Yeah. How about that?
Yeah. And so when you look at Kentucky and all these different places, and they're talking about the limestone and stuff, Darlington is on an aquifer that is one of the best in the world. As a matter of fact, if you think about when you go into McBee, before you get to the McLeod's, or just on the other side of McLeod's, is Nestle. Mm-hmm. And so Nestle purposely built that plant there because of being able to tap into that aquifer, and they said it's just a gold mine for them.
Wow.
So I think that's the history on this side, and maybe we've gone too long. I don't know, but
Oh, no. Sorry,
Well,
somebody just
you
got
left
text
out
messages
for
on.
the pirate. That pirate has a mascot that greets everybody
Oh,
at the front door
yeah, it's true.
as you come in.
So if you when you come to visit, you're going to be announced, kind of like when you're being announced to the Queen when you come through the front door. We have a sun conure parrot that actually squawks at you, and it's an interesting story. I don't think I should go into telling that story right now.
Yeah.
But he,
You don't want other people coming in being like, oh, that's mine.
yeah. But we actually put him under the covers while we're doing this so that he
Yeah.
wouldn't be squawking so much. But what I was going to say is, so that's my mother's side of the story, and how one that's in my blood is coming through, even though Bubba didn't have no kids, but, I'll just say the lineage of a little bit of a rogue guy, where I do have that side of me. But then what I didn't tell you is if you look on the walls when you come in here through the doors, I have a retail liquor license from 1948 that was a liquor store that's still in business in Florence at the corner of Dijon and South Irby, 631 South Irby. Andy is the owner of it now. So it's been in continuous operation. That's no longer our family's. And it was Marchette's Liquors, and that was my grandfather on my father's side. And then my uncle, Lukey, which was named after his father, went into business with him, and they opened up a second store, and it was on the corner of Coit and Evans Street, and that was called the Modern Liquor Store. The first one was called the Drive-In Liquor Store. And so I think I come by it naturally. My dad was a Scotch drinker. I stopped drinking whenever my kids were growing up for, good grief, 15 years. And so the realization of moderation is what we push.
Right.
And, we just appreciate, seeing people smile when they taste something, when they're surprised and go, wow, I wasn't expecting that. Occasionally you get the person that shudders.
Yeah.
Yeah, of course.
And they go, well, I don't drink anyways.
Yeah.
But, we are, I know what's the other thing. So one of the things that we are experimenting and discussing, if you notice when you come to our place out on Hoffmeyer Road, you'll notice there's an old truck that's at the entrance, and it's got a Boxwood Distillery label on the doorway. Well, obviously that truck, wasn't used for Boxwood Distillery, but that was a truck that was down in the woods where my shooting range is, that belonged to Sam Scipio. So when I was growing up, and we're talking about back in the 60s, the Scipio family had y'all need to turn around and wave, surprise visitor. So Sam had 6 boys, and it was a black family, and they all lived in this house on the farm, and the Scipio name goes way back for us. It wasn't just Sam, but it was also Belton Scipio. Belton rode in the truck that I drove the first time with a clutch, and I didn't know how to switch gears, and I drove all the way from one end of the farm to the other in first gear to go pick up somebody, and he never said a word. But Sam and Belton and then also Ann and Ella and all his families were all on the farm here when I was growing up. And whenever they left the farm, they left that truck. It was not running when they had it even. And so whenever we started to do this, I said, you know what, we're going to move that thing up front. We're going to landscape around it. We're going to use it as a decoration. And Ann is a few years younger. Ann Scipio is a few years younger than me. And so we kind of grew up together. And she helped take care of my mother until she died. And so she's like a sister from a different mother. And so I asked Ann one day, I said, Ann, I want to ask permission if you're okay with this, and I give you permission to tell me no. I said, I would like to use your name and association with the truck, as well as possibly come up with a alcohol that is called Scipios. And so we're actually, looking at either it's going to be a vodka or it could be, a sugar shine, which would be, a moonshine, which it really is still a vodka, that we would add that line in, but then the label would have the truck, and then
Right.
it'd be called Scipios. And of
Right.
course, the play on it is the sip.
Right.
And then we were also talking with Rob about creating a line of Scipio mocktails. And so those are some things that will come down the road. Big ideas, have enough time,
Right.
but, don't want to sit stale and just kick
Right.
back.
Of course. So now are the rums all available?
The rums are all available, and we're constantly trying to keep up with it. We've had good sales on them, and keeping us on our toes.
Right.
Between traveling and stuff like that. I'm down here anytime I can, along with everybody else who's helping. So
Right.
want everybody to come out. I guess I should mention our hours.
Oh, yeah, definitely
so
let everybody
we're-
know.
And location.
and locations 3914 Hoffmeyer Road, and actually it's just inside Darlington County, but we have a Florence address. So pretty much halfway between Darlington and Florence, off of Hoffmeyer Road, 5 miles from 5 Points. That's the best way to tell you is if you put your odometer on it, drive past the county line, and you started at 5 Points, is 5.2 miles probably.
And to the people traveling from far off, hopefully, it's not far from 20 either.
Or 95, actually.
Yeah, it's not very far, especially if you get off at the Timminsville Highway exit. I don't remember which one that is, but
Highway 340,
Yeah,
exit 137. It's a mile and a half. Turn right at the light.
Yep.
Actually, going towards Darlington, turn right at the light. Go exactly a mile and a half in the entrance to Triple R, as well as Boxwood Distillery is there. Thursday, Friday, hours are 1 to 6, and Saturday is 10 to 4. We may expand that in the future, but right now, that's about all I can do.
and the place is awesome.
Yeah, and for I know we mentioned it earlier, but for the locals around here, it's where you pick strawberries whenever you were a kid. Come on
Yeah.
out, you know where it is. So
Yeah.
I can't use the term hidden gem because a lot of people know it's been
Right.
a lot of people's history. But if you haven't been out here before, you need to come out here because it's absolutely beautiful and the amount of history that Jack's gone through with us, but the love and his family and everything that's here.
Well,
come experience it.
and I was
Even if
gonna
you don't
say-
drink.
Yeah, for sure. Oh, I was going to say, when I walked in, Jack had met Bill before, but I had never met Jack, but he welcomed me right in and started telling me everything. So I have a feeling that you come out here and you're going to meet a friend while you're here, whether you've met Jack before or whoever else is here, you can tell the passion is there. He can tell you every single thing about all of this that you see those who are watching that's around. I mean, that's the cool part about it is just, obviously the awesome products that you had to offer is cool, but the fact that you come into a homey place, and a good business.
This is the exact reason we started this podcast.
Exactly, right.
Is for people that don't know you to meet the people that we have in our lives.
Right.
Well, that's interesting. As I've said, I had not even realized that there was a podcast going on, and so whenever Bill, said, "Oh, we got this podcast with Trey," I said, "With Trey? What?"
Yeah.
I said, "I'm sitting there thinking, when do you got time? I mean, y'all are cutting hair all the time."
Shop talk. That's
Yeah.
that's how it came to be.
Yeah,
It's
that's
just
the idea
shop
was
talk.
literally sitting in the chair.
Yeah,
so many
hanging out.
stories were shared, and then it was like, man, there's so many interesting people around this area. They need a voice.
Yeah.
Well, the best story I can tell on Trey and Rob concerning me is this is several years ago, and we were messing with this on a small scale, and I walk in and I can't remember if I'd brought a bottle or whether they already had some bottles in there, and I'm talking to him about it, and Rob's cutting hair and Trey's over there cutting hair, and this guy's sitting there, and we're talking back and forth about the alcohol and how's it coming and all this kind of stuff. And then when Rob gets done with the guy cutting his hair, he reaches over, pulls out a drawer, and grabs and hands the guy a pistol. And then when he pulls the apron off of him, he's got a badge on his side. Now you talking about somebody's heart falling out, and the realization, the guy said, "You're too small time. I ain't worried about it," and stuff. So I'm glad to be able to say, whoever he was, we are legal now. We've got all the licensing. We've done everything we're supposed to do.
Now come visit sometime.
And he said, "When you're ready, I want some." And then the other thing is
Well, he's retired now.
is he
so,
really? Maybe he can come out and help me a little bit.
Yeah, he would love to.
That's a whole nother story, is that you basically have SLED investigation and everything on you, and having them come and look at things. And of course,
How often do you have, an agent or an inspector or something like that?
my understanding from talking to others in the state, you won't ever see them again. But the first part that you do, and of course, our goal is to stay legal. But I would say the person that's the most pleased that we are legal is my wife.
yeah, I'm sure. Helps her
I
sleep
bet
at night.
there was a period where, because the time it takes to be able to brand it and label it as what it is, until you're licensed, but you have to have product to show
Right.
it. Like it's such
To have a reason to
weird
go through it,
thing
like you have
to get
Yeah,
to
like
that
you
point.
you have to have already made it, tried it, let other people try it
and they're
before
like,
you
"Well,
say,
how much
okay,
of
I'm
it
ready
have
to
you made?"
commit.
That is the part that when you are trying to figure this out, and you're having to go through the process and ask the people that know, how do you do that? I mean, this is no small investment. Now, I'm
Right.
not very big. This is small compared to ones around the state where you go. I mean, I can tell you some really great places that have got just tremendous systems, but they're also
Right.
they're basically in Hilton Head and Greenville, and they got a high tourism.
Right.
But they spent millions. But on this, I've what do you call it? Cash flowed it personally,
Right.
without borrowing and stuff like that. And so to make that kind of investment without knowing whether you've ever made a drop is a challenge that, truthfully, I think that there should be where you can get a experimental license to try to get into the business.
For sure.
Because it's a fun business, and it's at the same time you gotta do it right.
Mm-hmm.
And I agree with the regulations being there, because you could really end up with some bad product out there.
I think one thing that we didn't touch was you're adding history to the property, what's been in your family forever, but the name Boxwood itself.
Yeah, we talked about a little bit, I think, or maybe we talked about before it, but so, the farm, has been around since 1800, and the house was 1870. I don't know whether it was actually in 1939 when everybody moved out here that the boxwoods were planted, and that's when the name started, or whether it was actually, earlier. But what I can tell you, as being a horticulturist, that whenever I moved back from Clemson I graduated in 78, so 78 through 79, I worked in Florence for an architectural firm and landscape architects. And my wife was still at Clemson, but we actually cut the boxwoods that were 2 stories tall.
Oh my God.
Down to nubs. I'm talking about,
Yeah.
I mean, I had trunks of boxwood bushes
Right.
that were like small trees. And that wood is very hard, which is, I think, the reason this particular brand, probably in like in England and stuff, they made boxes out of them,
Right.
precision boxes, and they made the scales of rulers that you see that are 3-sided that are so accurate.
Right.
Were made out of boxwood. And so when we cut those down, of course, it was horrifying because, did we kill them? And I think I lost 1 or 2 of them. But, if you go up there now, those boxwoods are 1 story tall.
Yeah.
And they're massive and stuff. Hurricane Hugo in 1989 came through, and there was trees, bigger and around than this table that were in the yard that fell.
Mm-hmm.
And then Hurricane Matthew came through here and when Hurricane Matthew came through, we lost 29 trees on the and stuff, and so and some of them were very massive in the yard, and we actually were hosting the Pee Dee Land Trust in 2 weeks, and so that was.
It was a cleanup, huh?
It was a cleanup,
Yeah.
and I buried the Galloway's largest 8-wheel tractor in our front yard, exactly where we were having the event, trying to stand up a tree that had blown over. They had to get a big wrecker, one of those giant wreckers to come pull it out.
Oh, man.
So I've got pictures of that kind of thing. But there's a lot of history, Trey. You're right. The other thing is living in an old house built in 1870. We have actually spent a small fortune. What was the name of that movie? The Money Pit, with I think it might have been Tom Hanks. No, or Steve Martin.
There was the Burbs, which I think you're thinking of,
Yeah.
with Tom Hanks, where he's like
Yeah.
standing holding the water hose and everything.
Yeah, but then the Money Pit was actually,
Yeah.
I think, Steve Martin, and basically, we love it, and we've done everything we can to try not to change the character and everything. And the other thing that my wife would tell you is, all right, so for every generation that's lived in the house, they all die and they leave everything in it. And so here we are, 100 plus years later, multiple generations, and the furniture and things all, just so much heritage in there, and so much family stuff. I hope to be able to retire, besides doing this, is eventually to go through up in what we call the garret, which is the top of the house. There's 15 trunks that date back to 1800s that, got stuff in there that, I've gone through some. Now it's not full of treasures and things like that, but there are treasures to some people. They would, and so it's a question of, all right, what do you do with that?
Man, what if you go through there and there's like a alcohol recipe from?
The pine bark stew, which is a fish stew that I make, is one of those recipes that my great uncle Bubba and my grandfather
That's awesome.
made, and I haven't made it in a good while. We used to have it every time I had a birthday, and it's always cold weather type fish stew,
Right.
and we'll cook it outside and stuff like that. We also have, a lot of y'all may not know, I made a bandwagon. So if you ever follow on Facebook, if I don't have a Facebook page for me, it's Boxwood Bandwagon. And so if you look at that, that's basically where I took a cotton wagon and turned it into a stage, and it's covered and closed up and stuff where bands can play. And, we'll host nonprofit organizations that fall within what we believe.
Right.
And basically just say, hey, look, we want to share the farm. Now, we don't want to share it with anybody who just wants to drive up in the middle of the night and middle of the day.
Right.
But, bottom line is that if we can help a nonprofit with hosting a spot, we're glad to do that. We used to do the egg drop for Alzheimer's, not Alzheimer's.
How can they get a hold of you for that?
Actually, for that, probably at this point would be Jack at BoxwoodDistillery.com. And it wasn't, autism. Boy, thank you. We used to, and we still would do it, but until COVID came, we would do an egg drop where we would drop eggs out into a circle, and whoever had the number for the closest thing for them, that was a good fundraiser for them. And I said, I only get one requirement. I get to drop the eggs.
Nice.
So I'd always get in the helicopter and say, okay, I want to go around the property and shoot a video so I could have an aerial view of the property.
Mm-hmm.
For me at the shop, those are some of my most special relationships that I've built, is with kids on the spectrum.
Yep. Autism is, growing up, whenever I was, that wasn't even a word.
Right.
It wasn't even in existence. And we've had some, good close friends that have had or have children on it, and they, the interesting part about it is they're just brilliant.
Yes.
But
Every one of them.
I think what happened whenever I was a kid, that was you got put in special needs, and they didn't, you just got pushed to the side.
Right. Didn't use their ability.
Yeah. So it's it's great awareness, things like that. So
Right. Well, that's awesome too,
out,
man.
Shout out to the local autism group.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. Well, you guys got anything else?
I was just going to simply add again to all of our listeners, like we said a second ago, seriously, if you haven't been out here, come out here, visit everybody at Boxwood. It truly is a hidden gem. I mean, you are missing out. If you haven't been, it's so easy to find. It's a great location. No reason why you're not coming out here.
Yeah, and I would just say from the first time I came in not long ago, I mean, I knew we had to do this podcast. Your story has to be out there, and we appreciate you letting us be that platform to share your story, because I know you said it was an honor to you, but it's truly an honor to us to have you on, and because Darlington boys here, you're doing something special for the county for real, and you are now a part of Darlington history,
right?
So that's something you can think about for the rest of your life, and knowing after your life you're going to be remembered for this.
Yeah, there's not many people that can say that they're trying to continuously add history for their family to keep doing that. Like that's a super special thing, and I hope that we can come back out as the future stuff gets released.
Absolutely, man.
So the shout out on the continuation of that is the continuation of the generations. Right now, my middle daughter and her husband and kids, or not kids, they're grown, live on the farm in their home, and so my youngest daughter, when her husband retires, will come into the home that we're in and continue the generations there. And then my oldest daughter and her husband live up in Malden. He is also involved with helping research and all that. He's the number 2 librarian for the Greenville Library System. So shout out to Brian Morrison and Rose.
He might be a good one.
Yeah, he would be a good one to have on.
Yeah, he would be. He's helped research and just helped me trying to figure out different things. Our desires for them is for him to be able to move to Florence and they'll build on the farm also. So, and then as I said, my youngest daughter, her husband's in the Air Force. He will, no question, he is the best taster of. He wants to taste any kind and every kind of bourbon or anything, and sending me ideas and also marketing and stuff. So more than likely, if we can grow the business to a point where all of them can participate, Jackson for the Moya Mendez is here. So Jimmy and Becca Moya Mendez are the ones that live here, and he's from Darlington, grew up right over here picking strawberries is how he met my family and married one of my daughters. So Darlington is important to us, and so is Florence. But the reality is our farm is, 7 acres in Florence, and the rest of it's all in Darlington. Hooray. And plus Darlington was in business long before Florence.
Oh, yeah.
Amen. Thank
We're
you.
taking credit for that. Yeah. Well, we appreciate it, Jack. And to our listeners, thank y'all for tuning in again. And like I said, this was a special one.
So we'll have this one up on video for you guys.
Yep. Check it out on YouTube.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.